Hello, and welcome to the Support for Caregiver Awareness, Learning, and Empowerment, or SCALE 8-week webinar series that aims to empower you with practical information and skills by enhancing your self-awareness and focusing on your own needs to improve your mental health as a caregiver. My name is Joy McLeod, and I became a caregiver in 2015 after my dad sustained a high-level spinal cord injury. I discovered the Ontario Caregiver Organization during the pandemic and have been volunteering with their peer support program since 2022. I'm incredibly passionate about SCALE, and we're thrilled to have you with us today. Discussions around difficult emotions like anger and resentment are so important, if only to normalize them. Today's webinar is called Navigating Difficult Emotions Within Caregiving Relationships. Caregiving relationships often fall short of our expectations, leading to feelings of guilt, resentment, and anger. This week, Michal will help us recognize and address these difficult emotions, like anger and resentment, and support a shift towards more fulfilling relationships in our caregiving role. Before we begin, I wanted to take a moment to share that the OCO carries out its work while acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. This land is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people, and acknowledging this reminds us that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and friendship of Indigenous people. So before we get started, I just wanted to introduce our speaker today. I'm pleased to introduce Michal Goldstein. Michal Goldstein is a clinical social worker and therapist with over 15 years experience in supporting individuals, couples, and families to build stronger, healthier, and more meaningful relationships. She is also the owner and founder of Creating Connections Counseling Services, a virtual therapy practice based out of Toronto, where she and her team of therapists help individuals and families to reconnect and thrive, even within their challenging life experiences. Michal's professional understanding of the impacts of caregiving on one's health and well-being and her personal caregiving experiences have led her to extensive work with the Ontario Caregiver Organization and fuels her passion to supporting caregivers navigate their challenging life circumstances. So without further ado, thank you so much for joining us today, Michal, and I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Joy. Welcome to the 5th week of the SCALE webinar series. We're halfway through the webinar program now with 3 weeks left to go after today. We're going to join here for a webinar every Tuesday at 12 p.m. along with other caregivers who are coming to join and discuss different topics that come up, different emotions that come up within your caregiving role. Along with the webinars in the SCALE program, we also have individual and group counseling sessions. The group counseling sessions are available Mondays at 10 a.m., Wednesdays at 7 p.m., or Thursdays at 12:30 p.m. And you can register for as many of the group sessions that are left, pending availability. But right now we do still have openings in the group support sessions. And they're a great way to debrief about the topics that we talk about today and just share with other caregivers. We also have individual counseling still available, and they're available throughout the week. If you take a shot of this QR code, you can access our booking site. You can also email us, go to our website or the phone number on the screen. You also should have been sent an email with a link to register for the counseling sessions when you registered for these webinars. So please reach out to us or anyone at the OCO if you're having any trouble registering for counseling. The counseling that we offer is there to provide you with ongoing support, but if you feel that you require immediate support, please reach out to a crisis helpline. They are there to provide you immediate support when caregiving becomes overwhelming, which it often does at times. So I encourage you to access whatever support you can, whether it's in the moment of a crisis or ongoingly through the individual and group counseling that we offer through SCALE. Along with these resources in this round of the SCALE program, we also have a workbook that will be sent to you after today's webinar. and will also be able to be accessed online in the spring. You will see this journal icon throughout my presentation today, and that will just cue you to a resource that is in the workbook that perhaps there'll be resources there, self-discovery questions there, or different exercises that you can do around today's topic. So just take a look out for that. So our topic today is I feel angry and resentful, navigating difficult emotions within our caregiving relationships. I can imagine the courage it takes to even just step into this space, talking about something that isn't so easy to always admit or discuss openly, which is anger and resentment in your caregiving role. But I want to assure you that these feelings are very real, valid, and they're more common than we often acknowledge within caregiving. For many of you, caregiving isn't necessarily an act of love. It may be an act of responsibility. You may not have chosen to step into this role, but you've been placed in this role by necessity. And whether you're caring for a parent, a child, a spouse, or a sibling, the challenges you face in this role, regardless of when it began or whether you chose this role or did not choose this role, you may love the person that you're caring for. You may feel a lot of anger towards the person you're caring for. But with all of these different positions that you might have entered this role or that you're in, anger and resentment are a very normal experience. The weight of anger and resentment can often be very confusing or can make you feel a lot of guilt for the fact that you're feeling this. But I want to begin today just by normalizing this experience, as Joy shared earlier. If you felt any anger or resentment in your caregiving role, I want you to know that you are not alone. Many, many caregivers struggle with these emotions, and it does not make you a bad person. It does not make you a bad caregiver. It makes you human. Anger and resentment are part of the human experience. And when you're caring for someone else, when there's so many expectations and demands on your time and your energy, and there's so many changes in your relationship with the person that you're caring for, it's normal to feel a lot of frustration, and it's impossible sometimes to contain that frustration. So it's essential before we even start talking about, tools and resources to address this anger. It's important to understand that these emotions are not a sign of failure. They are not a sign of weakness. They are just a natural part of the hard work that you are doing. They are a natural part of the caregiving experience. To understand this experience a bit more, I just want to speak for a few minutes about why anger and resentment come up so often in caregiving. So the first aspect is the loss of control. As a caregiver, you will often find yourself in situations where you feel powerless. You're watching your care recipient decline. You are accessing resources in the community or doctors, professionals that are maybe not so understanding or not so helpful or so difficult to reach, right? And you're losing, and you're feeling very powerless within that position. The health and the needs of your care recipient are often out of your hands, right? There's so much that you can't control. And that leads to a lot of frustration. As caregivers, we often have this deep desire to fix things. I don't know if any of you experience that, but I know I do within my role. And it's this sense of helplessness that we feel not being able to fix these things can easily turn into anger at the situation we're in, anger at ourselves for making a mistake, not doing the right thing, not having enough energy, whatever it might be, or even at the person that we're caring for. Another aspect of this anger is these unmet expectations. And what I'm referring to there is the expectations that we have around what caregiving might look like for us. You might think that I'll be able to do this. I'll be able to do this gracefully. I'll be able to do this with a smile. You might have this expectation of yourself that I can do this in a different kind of way. I should have been able to do this in a different kind of way. Or you might have an expectation of your care recipient that they might be appreciative or grateful for everything that you're doing for them. But the reality is often very, very different. Your care recipient may not express gratitude. They might even push back against your help. They might even be rude when you try to help them. And this mismatch between our expectations and the reality that we're dealing with can lead to a lot of resentment, especially when the hard work that you're doing isn't being acknowledged. Another aspect is role reversal. When you're caring for a parent or an older sibling, it's natural to feel a lot of anger and resentment at this role reversal. This also exists with partners as well, where a lot of the responsibilities that one partner typically took on now have become yours. And there's this reversal of roles where you're doing a lot of the caretaking that perhaps they provided you with. You might be grieving these aspects of the relationship you once had, or feeling frustrated by the responsibility that you now hold in the relationship. And it could feel like your entire life is upside down, just aside from the dynamic between the two of you. So that sparks a lot of emotions that you might not have necessarily anticipated or thought of. And here you find yourself feeling very angry. Another aspect is isolation and burden. So, as a caregiver, you often carry the weight of responsibility alone, right? A lot of times there's family members who are not involved, who are not helping, and these constant demands on you can feel very overwhelming, naturally overwhelming, leading to just exhaustion and the need to isolate yourself, because when you do have the time, you just want to rest or you don't have the energy for other people. So this exhaustion often creates this space where that anger fills, right? So when you feel like you're carrying this burden alone, that can often lead to anger. So we have all these different aspects that come together to make it very understandable that we might feel angry and resentful within this position. And the last one I just want to name is a loss of self. When when we're caring for somebody else so frequently and so intensely, it can just consume so much of your time and energy that it feels like you lose parts of yourself. And one of our further webinars is on the topic of how to find yourself again within that, because of how much this impacts your feelings of anger and resentment and all different emotions, strong emotions that come up. Losing your own sense of identity can fuel resentment because you feel like your own needs are constantly needing to be set aside for somebody else. But as much as your anger and resentment are normal, and we've named all the different reasons, and aspects, and just to name a few of the aspects that might cause anger and resentment to come up for you as a caregiver, you're likely here today because you don't enjoy or appreciate having anger and resentment as part of your life so frequently and as part of your caregiving experience. And I commend you for the fact that despite all these challenges that this role brings to you, you're still looking to improve. You're still looking for ways to become better caregivers and better people. So I want to name the reality of anger and resentment in our lives, and the reality of the sparks of anger and resentment in your role as a caregiver. But I also want to give you the power to have more authority over this anger, to be able to choose when you are going to feel anger, as opposed to it overtaking you in the way that it does. So the first thing that we need to understand is that anger is a secondary emotion. In order to manage anger, we need to understand that anger is actually a cover for and protecting us from experiencing a much more deeper, raw emotion. Your anger is real, but it's just tip of the iceberg. It's just the tip of the situation we're in. So it's not the thing that my care recipient said that's what set us off. We need to start the process of addressing our anger by recognizing that there's a deeper emotion driving why the experience is causing you so much anger. So, yes, my care recipient said something that upset me, but what underlying experience, what underlying emotion is driving the rage or the anger or the resentment that I'm feeling right now? Is it fear of what the future is going to bring? Is it a feeling of guilt or shame that comes up when they say that to me? Is it grief over the fact that they don't communicate with me the same way they used to? Is it a sense of helplessness? Just to name a few. For example, a caregiver might feel anxious about their care recipient declining, right? Their declining health and the extra demands that might bring for them. But instead of experiencing fear or vulnerability in that position, which is the raw emotion that's happening for us, you might express anger, right? You might express anger towards the situation or towards the person that you're caring for, which is going to mask these deeper worries. So very often we're not in touch with the actual root of our anger because the anger is so loud and so noticeable in our mind and it just, it's fiery, right? So we notice that, but we don't seem to notice what is driving that anger. An image of an iceberg is often used to understand the emotion of anger. When we understand that anger is a secondary emotion, that's what's above the surface, if you can see the screen now. Icebergs show a very small percentage of what's actually happening under the surface. So anger is that small percentage, even if it feels so big. But what's under the surface is all of the raw and deep emotions, the primary emotion that's actually driving our anger, our raw, our vulnerable, and our overwhelming feelings. So we want to recognize for ourselves that anger is actually a signal for us. It's a signal that there is something deeper happening under the surface. There is something more below the anger. So just looking at the screen right now, if you can see, if not, I will read some of the words that are under the iceberg of anger on our screen. Can anyone share in the chat some emotions that they might be able to point to right now that are perhaps the primary emotion under their secondary emotion of anger? And I'm just going to read some of the words here for those of you that can't see right now. Some of the emotions that are named here are embarrassed, scared, grief, overwhelmed, tricked, frustrated, shame, distrustful, rejected, attacked, guilt, annoyed, exhausted, lonely. So those are some that are on the screen. And I'm just going to read off some that you've shared in the chat. And I appreciate you sharing because it helps us really connect to each other and know, what are some of these normal emotions that we're feeling as caregivers. So I see overwhelmed, hurt, insecurity of the future, grief, regret, sadness, disappointment, worried, disrespected. Yes, these are the raw emotions. These are the emotions under your anger, right? We don't feel angry without one of these being the source of that, being the driving force of that. So our I see now here helpless, anxious, isolated, resentful that my parents made no plans, so feeling caught off guard, right? That's the root of anger there. They didn't make plans and I'm left with a big weight on my shoulders, right? So it's not the anger that's talking, it's disappointment perhaps, right? Disappointment that they didn't plan so that my future would be easier, right? Annoyed, exhausted, disrespected, unappreciated, right? So I want you to notice that when the word angry comes up in your mind or the word resentful comes up in your mind, I want you to try to use that as a signal for yourself. It's a signal that there is something in my life that needs attention. Maybe it's a boundary that you need to reinforce. Maybe it's a need for more support, whether that's from family members or friends or professional services. Perhaps it's a realization that you're just running on empty and you need to prioritize your well-being. But when we hear the word angry, I feel angry that, I feel resentful that, I want you to use those words now as a signal for yourself to dig deep, to turn inward and say, what is driving this? What is the need that is not being met within this situation? So even if there are small shifts that we can make in that moment, that is going to shift this iceberg. If under the iceberg shrinks, if the intensity of our emotions shrink and become smaller, so will the iceberg above the surface. So will be that anger. So when we can recognize what is driving our anger, what the need, the unmet need that's driving our anger, it can create more space in our life. It creates more space. It takes away from that angry iceberg, not just for, not just space for your care recipient, but space for yourself, space for empathy in your life, right? Not just for your care recipient, but for yourself. The relationship, the caregiving relationship is so complex, right? You have moments in, even if they're few and far between, of tenderness and connection, right? Where you're providing care, even if there's not feelings of warmth in that moment, you are still doing an act of warmth when you're providing that care. But there are also so many moments of frustration and overwhelm. But these conflicting emotions can exist for you. It's okay for them to both be there, but we need an understanding of what's actually happening for us, right? Because otherwise, anger is the loudest and it will just take up all the space we have for feeling anything else. Resentment is also an expression of need. So resentment grows when caregiving becomes all encompassing, right? When you feel like your needs, as we mentioned earlier, these unmet needs are taking a back seat, right? So your life is no longer your own. You are devoting your life, your time, your schedule, where you're going to be, what you're going to make for supper is all revolving around your care recipient on most days. So your identity is shifted from being a child to being a caregiver, from being a spouse to being a caregiver, from being a parent to being a caregiver. So it's not hard to have resentment spark up there because there are so many of your needs that are not being met. I want to share with you a caregiving experience, an experience of a caregiver that I worked with. Dave is, I'm just going to read for you some notes that I wrote down about this caregiver. Dave is caring for his wife who has mobility challenges as a result of her Parkinson's diagnosis. Dave's wife has a lot of practical physical needs that he needs to support her throughout the day around. Dave is noticing slowly that his anger and frustration are coming up a lot more recently. And as he feels that anger and resentment, he starts to also feel shame for the anger that he's feeling. And I'm sure a lot of you can relate to that. When his wife makes a request from him, he often finds himself getting just automatically upset at her, being rude to her, or will make snide remarks, and then feels a lot of resentment, feels a lot of guilt. So it's this vicious cycle that happens. And he's finding himself really not being in line with his true self, not being in line with the way that he wants to interact with her. He's at times yelling at her. He's just feeling a lot of anger. He feels like his wife just expects him to manage everything because he's able while she has disabilities and therefore is not as able to do everything, but he also feels that it's unrealistic to expect him to be able to do everything, which it is, right? He's only one person, and now he's needing to do for two. And that's so many times the experience of caregivers, that you're needing to fill the shoes of more than one person. And for many of you who are caring for more than one care recipient, you're filling 10 shoes, right? You're not just filling 4 shoes, right? I looked at this anger with Dave, and we took out this iceberg, and we looked at and we explored a bit his reactions and the different situations that triggered his anger. And Dave was able to recognize that what was actually making him angry under the surface was a feeling of shame. He felt a lot of shame that he was so exhausted. He felt this need to be able to meet all of his wife's needs, and felt shame that he couldn't. He felt like, I'm supposed to be able to do all of this and I can't, and there's something wrong with me. And then he also noticed a lot of shame in wishing that she would be in a nursing home already. And so he noticed that these were the emotions under the surface for him. There was shame in his wishes. There was shame in his feeling like he wasn't doing enough. And recognizing these feelings allowed Dave to name these emotions and these unmet needs that he had, right? That were driving the anger and resentment that he felt. So he didn't have an anger problem, right? That wasn't the issue here. The issue was that he was taking on more than he can handle. And he was in in an impossible situation of making demands, not just taking demands from his wife, but also making demands on himself, right? I'm wondering if any of these experiences that I'm naming from Dave, you can relate to. If anyone can share, are any of these your experiences? Feeling shame, feeling like there's too many responsibilities on me, wondering, do I have an anger problem? Why am I so angry all the time? I didn't used to be so angry all the time. Why am I constantly feeling resentful? What's happening here? And so what I worked on with Dave, and what I want to encourage you all to do, is to use the word anger in your mind as a cue for yourself to check in about my needs, to check in about my emotions. So anger is not a failure, it's a signal. So let's bring this home for a minute in a practical way in which you can incorporate this for yourself. And this script is also in the workbook. So when we notice, I feel angry, and I see some of you named in the chat, so you can use this example for yourself. I feel angry that my siblings do nothing to help, right? I see somebody named that emotion of anger. And so when we notice that we're feeling angry about something, I want the next piece to name for ourselves what is really hard for us right now. It's really hard that that's where we fill in the blank of the emotion that's under the surface there. So I feel angry that my siblings are not helping out. It's really hard that I have to do this all alone. I feel so lonely. I feel so overwhelmed. I feel exhausted, right? Those are some of those under the surface emotions that are driving this ship. And then to take it one step further, we want to name our need. What is the need that's coming up for us here? What unmet need do we now need to pay attention to and meet in order to address what's happening for us, just like what was happening for Dave? Dave realized, I have to lower my expectations of myself. I cannot possibly expect myself to meet all of my wife's needs, take care of working, which he was doing also, provide for our home, do all the things that I'm doing. It's impossible for me to fill all of these shoes, to fill all of these spaces. And and his recognition was, I need a caregiver support. So a PSW to come in and do some of the tasks for me, right? So not to say that for some of you, you might have that solution already, right? We're introspecting for ourselves to say, I feel angry that let me dig a little deeper and see what is so hard for me right now? What am I feeling? What emotion is under that? And then let me try to meet whatever unmet need is driving that. Can anyone give an example in the chat? I'm just going to open the chat to see if we've done that already. Can anyone give an example in the chat to fill in the blanks of I'm angry that, it's really hard that, or I need? And then I need, sorry. Just to give an example, if I say, I'm really angry that I spent hours preparing supper for my parents and then they didn't even say thank you, right? So now what am I noticing, right? I'm noticing I'm feeling a lack of gratitude. I'm feeling like I wasn't appreciated, right? And what do I need? I need validation. Right. And I'm noticing that for myself. Does that mean magically my care recipient is going to provide that validation? No, I can provide that validation for myself. I can call up my friend and say, I just made this massive supper and I wasn't appreciated. I need validation. I can say to my spouse, if my spouse is not my care recipient, I could say to a friend, I can say to a parent if my parent is not my care recipient, right? Other people in my life can help to provide me with my needs, including me providing that validation for myself, and us here together, other caregivers providing you that validation. You did an amazing thing by working so hard to prepare your mother's favorite meal, only to have her say, ew, I don't like this, right? You need validation. So you're feeling angry and resentment, but what do you need? You need validation in that moment. I see someone shared, I need my husband to, ooh, I just lost it. It went so fast. I need my husband to respect that I can't get to all the tasks he expects within his time frame, right? So that's noticing what is driving my anger, what is driving my resentment is I need that respect, right? So does that resolve the situation? No. And I want to name that. It's not that we are resolving the situation by naming the emotion that is driving our anger, but the ability to notice our thoughts, to notice what is happening for us, to notice what are the emotions and what are the needs that are coming up for us. It gives us the opportunity to say, hey, wait a second, you know what? This thought is not really helpful for me. It's not really helpful for me to feel angry or feel disappointed with this thing. It's not helping me. It's not serving me, right? So I'm going to go ensure that I'm meeting my needs in this situation so that I can feel differently about it. According to a new study from psychologists at Queen's University, they used MRI brain scans and they were able to actually detect uh, our thought transitions and to count how many thoughts we have per day. And on average, the participants in the program had 6.5 thoughts per minute or 6,200 thoughts per day. That is a lot of thoughts, right? There's a lot of information in our mind to process. And when you do a bit of thought tracking, I've done this personally, and I do this with a lot of my clients, you can begin to notice that a lot of our thoughts are not so accurate. A lot of our thoughts contribute to some of the feelings of anger and resentment that we feel. So the first step we took is to look at what emotion is under the surface and to name that emotion for ourselves and to name what need is there. The second tool that I want to look at right now is noticing what are the thoughts that are contributing to our anger. And I named this a bit earlier when we were talking about, expectations that we had perhaps, right? So when we have an expectation that for example, the example I used before is that our care recipient is going to be appreciative, right, of us, then all of a sudden, when the thought goes off, how could they not appreciate me? I'm doing so much for them. That will lead to feelings of anger that we might have in the situation, right? Our thoughts can often overgeneralize, or they might be one-sided, or they just may be downright mean to ourselves, right? And insensitive to ourselves by saying things like, you should have this or you should have that, right? Often our thoughts are contributing to the intense feelings of anger and resentment we're feeling. And there are actually most typically we have each individual has themes within their unhelpful thoughts that are contributing to the intensity of the anger and resentment they're feeling. And these are called cognitive distortions. I'm not sure if any of you have heard this term, but we will look for a few minutes on what cognitive distortions are and what are some common themes that you can notice and name for yourself. So cognitive distortions are thought patterns that tend to come up for us when we're under a lot of stress or in a rather difficult or triggering situation that we're in. So our brains are essentially filtering out, right? We have all of those thoughts, 6,200 thoughts a day, and our brains are essentially filtering out information in a specific way that can either make things feel lighter for us or make things feel heavier for us. Now, it doesn't mean the situation isn't there, but there is impact in how we are thinking about something that will impact the intensity of our feelings towards it. So let me give you an example. Have you ever had a situation not go well and thought, I can't deal with this. I can't live like this anymore, right? But then if you take a step back, you might realize, wait a second, this was just one incident in a full day of other neutral or maybe pleasant events that happened to me, right? But this situation that I'm in right now feels so overwhelming, and all my thoughts are focusing on this is too much and I can't handle that. This is an example of a cognitive distortion called overgeneralization, right? Where we take one moment and then we think of it like it represents everything we're experiencing. So instead of seeing it as a hard moment, it starts to feel like a hard day or a hard life, right? So we're generalizing. So this is just one example of how stress can shape our thinking, right? And these distortions don't mean that we're doing something wrong or there's something wrong with us. They're just part of us being human, that our mind filters all of those thoughts and focuses on certain ones in a certain way. And these cognitive distortions, as they're called, quote unquote, they're especially common in caregiving because it's such an emotionally and physically demanding role. So you're constantly in these high pressure, exhausting situations, and your brain starts to make shortcuts to deal with things. And sometimes, unfortunately, those shortcuts can actually make things feel more overwhelming. Not to say the situation's not overwhelming, but we have the ability to overgeneralize a difficult situation to everything, or we have the ability to notice what other thoughts are there. Let me notice these patterns of thinking that I tend to get into, and that will give me a little bit more control over my emotional responses to the situation. So think of it as giving yourself a mental tool to work with, right? You might not always be able to stop yourself from feeling stressed, but you can definitely notice for yourself when your brain is making things harder for you, right? The situation is hard enough. We don't have to make it harder for ourselves, right? So, for example, if you catch yourself thinking, I can't handle this, I'm a terrible caregiver, you can pause and ask yourself, wait a second, is that actually true? Or am I just having a tough moment? Am I overgeneralizing an experience or an emotion? So often just stepping back from the thought like that, even just like that, is that really true? Or am I just having a tough moment? That can give us just a little bit more breathing room to feel a little bit less stressed and overwhelmed. So I want to go over a few common cognitive distortions that might pop up for you as a caregiver. And I want to assure you, as you see the workbook in the corner here, that this list is on your in your workbook as well. So don't feel like you need to get it all down. So another common cognitive distortion is catastrophizing. So that's when our mind jumps very quickly to the worst case scenario. So if this one thing goes wrong, everything will fall apart, right? If we don't get the appointment with the doctor tomorrow, then it's all gonna fall apart, right? I'm never going to be able to manage it. It's very easy to go to this place, to this catastrophizing place, especially when you're under a lot of pressure, right? So taking a deep breath in that situation and asking yourself, how likely is the worst case scenario that I'm thinking of? Now, we don't all catastrophize. This might not be your cognitive distortion, right? And sometimes we have a few of these, and sometimes only one of them are an issue for us, get in the way for us, or make things harder for us. So it could be when you ask yourself, like, okay, how likely is the worst case scenario? Maybe you're not catastrophizing. There could be a very difficult scenario, right? But asking ourselves the question helps our brain slow down and choose other options that make our stress level less intense. Another example is personalization. Now, this happens when you feel like everything is your responsibility, your fault. So, for example, if my care recipient is having a bad day, if I think this is my fault, I'm not doing enough, I should have done this, I shouldn't have said it like that, that's personalization. Please feel free to share in the chat with the other caregivers here if you can relate to any of the cognitive distortions that I'm naming. And then we're going to take a look after this a little bit more deeply at what our experience is, but feel free to share. Another distortion is should statements. This is when you will hear yourself holding yourself to very high expectations, like I should be able to handle this without help. I should never get frustrated. These shoulds are really, really hard to live up to, and they cause us a lot of stress. No one can do it alone. No one should be able to do everything. And it's okay to not be able to do everything. And it's okay to not meet all the shoulds that are in your minds. But when you hear that word should, let that be a sign for you that this should statement distortion is coming to make your day harder, right? And when we notice these distortions, that gives us the opportunity to take a step back and reframe and ask ourselves, really, should I? Should I never get frustrated? Should I be able to handle this without help? Actually, that's not so accurate. It's not so accurate. That's what these cognitive distortions are. They distort our thoughts to make them a bit inaccurate. Another example is all or nothing thinking. So this is when you'll see things in black and white terms, like thinking in absolutes, like always, never, every. I never do a good job at anything. If I'm not perfect, then I'm failing. If I have to do everything, or I'm letting everyone down, right? The truth is that caregiving is not about perfection. There is a lot of gray areas. And when you're juggling 20 balls, it's a matter of which ones do I need to hold in my only two hands right now. So it's impossible for me to be able to do everything and never drop a ball, right? That's impossible. So the response that you might want to give yourself if you notice that you have this all or nothing thinking is being good enough is plenty, right? That might be your antidote if all or nothing thinking is part of your distortions. Another example is jumping to conclusions. So you might find yourself interpreting the meaning of a situation without necessarily evidence that that is the accurate situation. And that takes two different forms. One is mind reading, where we're interpreting another person's actions and deciding what their thoughts are about a situation without a definitive knowledge of this. So, they're judging you, or they're thinking this about you, or they're upset with you, right? So that's a mind reading distortion. And the other one is fortune telling, which means that I'm assuming a situation will turn out badly without necessarily having the evidence. And so what we want to do when we notice any of these distortions is to ask ourselves questions. Is that actually accurate? What is my evidence for this, right? Does it really need to be this way? Is it all of the events or just this one, right? So we're challenging our own thinking when we can notice, slow our thoughts down enough to notice that one of these pieces are at play in a situation, right? So there's nothing wrong. I want to reiterate, there is nothing wrong with us if we are noticing these distortions in our mind. It is normal. We all have cognitive distortions that impact our experience. It's just a matter of being able to notice them, be still for long enough to notice what we are feeling. So just to put that into practice, and this is something that you can do for yourself at home, I want you to take a moment to reflect for yourself on a recent caregiving situation that brought up a lot of strong emotions for you, like we were discussing today. So whether it's anger, frustration, guilt, resentment, try to recall the situation that was happening. You can share it in the chat. You can recall it for yourself. What was the situation that you have in your mind that brought up a lot of strong emotions? Now I want you to try to focus, zoom in on one specific thought that came into your mind in that moment. In that moment that we're looking back to, this caregiving situation that brought up a lot of anger or resentment. It could be something like, no matter what I do, I'm not appreciated. Will they ever be satisfied? Why is this happening? Can anyone share their thought in the chat? If they can identify, sort of zoom in and pinpoint a thought that came up for us in that moment. He never thinks about my needs, I see. My mom doesn't appreciate me. A lot of frustration, just frustration. So try to zoom in on what was the thought that you were having in that moment, right? What was the thought that was leading to the sadness, to the frustration? I see no one cares about me. Why is this happening to me, right? I feel betrayal, right? So try to notice what thought was leading this feeling of betrayal. Try to zoom in on some of the thoughts that we're having. And sometimes it's hard to look back, but if you remember this, the next time you're in a difficult caregiving situation, the next time you notice anger come up for you, then try to zoom in on, what am I thinking right now? What are some of the thoughts? Even try to jot it down on paper. What are some of the thoughts that are leading me to feeling angry? I see someone wrote, my children don't see if I need a break. No one offers to help me, right? Now, if we take a look at this list of cognitive distortions again, can anyone name for themselves what their thought, what distortion their thought is being driven by? It's an overgeneralization. They never help me. They never support me, right? Why is this happening to me is catastrophizing. I see someone wrote. Yeah, so we're naming for ourselves. We recognize these feelings, and I don't want anyone here to think that I'm saying these feelings are not real because I'm catastrophizing it. No, the feeling is real, the thought is real, right? But how is the intensity of the thought? How is the cognitive distortion affecting how intensely that makes me feel? right? So this does take a bit of practice. I want you to know it takes a bit of practice to start noticing patterns. But what's really helpful is when we start naming our thoughts, when we start doing this like thought record for ourselves of just noticing what thoughts are coming up for me. Like what are some of the thoughts driving my anger right now? We will notice patterns. We very often have patterns of distortions, right? And when we notice that pattern of distortion, then we have a lot more power to shift the thought, right? To shift the thought, notice the should, and reword that should. So it's a practice. It's a practice, and it doesn't come naturally at first. But that's why we've included this list in the workbook, this list with the explanations of what they each mean, and some reflection questions that you can use to try to practice this a bit more, to try to notice some of these distortions for yourself. And if you feel like you need support in that, then that's a perfect conversation for a one-to-one counseling session that you can access through this program, right? Help me identify what distortion is coming up for me here. And we can also talk about that more in the group sessions this week. So we've discussed two different tools today. The first is that anger iceberg. So being aware that anger is a cue for us. The word anger in our minds is a cue for us to know it's a signal for me to look at what emotion is happening under the surface for me. What is the raw primary emotion happening under the surface for me? Let me look at that and let me try to uncover and address whatever unmet need is happening for me here. And the second tool we looked at is more of a thought-based tool, is noticing what thoughts are contributing to my anger and resentment. What distortions of my thought, what generalization of my thoughts or personalization of my thoughts are causing me to feel this level of intensity within my anger. There's a number of resources that we've provided also in the workbook that you can look at, articles on cognitive distortions, books about cognitive distortions to learn a bit more about this, and then more discussion around anger and resentment within caregiving, as well as some videos on the topic that can help you dive a bit deeper into this topic. There's also some reflection questions that you can look at that can help you uncover a bit more about what emotions and what feelings and thoughts are coming up for you within anger and resentment. So thank you so much for joining today. I know we've had to go a bit over time because of our technical difficulties earlier, and I apologize for that. But we will be coming back together next week to talk a bit more about self-compassion. And I'm okay for another few minutes, Joy, if there's any questions that have come up that you want me to answer.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mihal. This session, even though I've done it a few times now, I always learn something new, and I find it so helpful and validating. And it seemed like a lot of caregivers in the chat box were feeling similarly. Like you mentioned, we are running a little bit behind, but maybe I can squeeze in two questions before we sign off.
Mm-hmm.
And for those that need to sign off, thank you for joining, and they will be in the recording available later this week. Okay. So there seemed to be a lot of caregivers bringing up this idea of, not receiving outside help. So one caregiver said, well, my family doesn't actually ever help. So is that catastrophizing? Many caregivers brought up the frustration with not receiving help and support. So I guess two-part question. How can they address their frustration about not receiving this support when it would make their situation better? And do you have any tips for how caregivers can engage their family to be more involved?
Mm-hmm. So, in terms of the frustration piece, so using the tool in terms of the anger iceberg that we talked about earlier, I think the first step is really naming for yourself like what this brings up for you. And it's not necessarily going to be the same for every person, right? The situation can be the same in terms of not receiving support from family, but what it brings up for me is going to be different based on my person, my, childhood experiences and everything in between. So noticing for yourself, like, what is so challenging for me about this situation, for me personally? Is it a sense of shame is it a sense of abandonment? Is it a sense of overwhelm? Like, what is the primary emotion? And there could be a few, right? That's really driving my frustration and my anger at the fact that I'm not receiving the support, right? Maybe it's feeling like I gave so much and now I'm not receiving back, right? That could be it for somebody. So it's really different for each person. So I would first encourage you to really name what is driving my personal anger and resentment over not receiving that support, right? On the surface, obviously, anyone who needs support and isn't receiving it is going to feel angry and frustrated, right? But try to dig a little bit deeper because the answer for how to address your personal anger is in what emotion is driving that, right? And and with that we can see what need of yours is not being met in this situation. Is it the need to of abandonment? Is that what the need is? Or is it the need of isolation, right? So I can't address the need if I don't know what it's actually about, right? I don't know if you've experienced this, Joy, but I know for myself, often when we're having a really hard time in an area, it's not that everything needs to turn around to make us feel better. Sometimes the smallest shifts can shift how we feel about a situation, right? Like it might seem small that our neighbor considered us and brought us supper one night. That might seem like it's just supper. But if my biggest challenge is not feeling noticed, and then I get noticed in that way, wow, does that feel amazing, right? And they write a little note, you're doing a great job, keep up the great work, right? Like, what does that feed for me in that moment, right? So when we can connect in a deeper way to what is actually driving our strong emotions, then we know how to meet those needs for ourselves or how to ask for that need from the people that are close to us and not necessarily our care recipient and not necessarily our family members if they are not the ones who are hearing us, right? But at least let us have our needs met, our core needs, right? I apologize. I forgot the other half of the question that you wanted me to answer.
No worries. The other part was if you have any tips for caregivers to engage their family or
Mhm,
friends who are
mhm.
not helping.
Yeah. So I would say that I answered that in the sense of getting in touch with your core need will actually help you know what you need to say and how to engage your family members. Because if you're not in touch with what specifically would help you, sometimes those shifts can be very small, and what you're actually asking them for is very small. So when I notice the hardest part for myself, that's what I can ask other people for. When I'm just saying, I need help, you don't ever help, you're not here for me, that's not necessarily going to land with somebody. But if I am very specific around my needs, then that shifts something in other people as well. They feel less overwhelmed by the idea of taking on that task, right? Not that I need to be busy with, being concerned with what's overwhelming them. I need to be concerned with what's overwhelming me. But part of that is getting my needs met. And if I can narrow down what is going to help me feel my needs met, then that can help with these interactions as well, right? And the same thing with our care recipients, right? If I can narrow down for myself what this anger is really about, I can address that in a whole different way when I notice, oh, it's the sense of being unappreciated. Like that's actually what's driving my anger. So now I know what to say. Now I know how to address that in a different way. And we're going to talk in a further week around boundaries where we can, get a little bit clearer on how to name our needs for boundaries from other people as well, which I think will help some of the caregivers who have raised this.
Thank you. That's great advice, to really thinking about what we need, being specific. And if the situation doesn't change, then working on how we're experiencing it and thinking about it.
Yeah,
Yeah, really appreciate that.
no problem.
So thank you for all those who attended today's webinar. We really appreciate having you here with us. And thank you again, Mihal, for talking about this really, really important topic. We appreciate it.
Thank you.